Well, this is a gathering of Christians, Muslims and Jews. Now, those are the three big fractures in world religion between Christians, Muslims and Jews. And the thing that interests me about this particular exercise is you're trying to find a higher level of disagreement. So you're trying to find some understanding, perhaps some mutuality of some things that you can agree together about in certain principles. But at the same time, you're not trying to collapse all the disagreements into some kind of a homogeneous oneness.
Two angry dogs live in our town. Across the street, they snarl and frown. For many years, it has been so. Their masters taught them all they know. Their masters taught them all they know.
As I got into the religion, what I find from it is much more universalist. It says specifically the Jews, the Christians, the Sabaeans, those who believe in God in the last days, have nothing to fear.
3 churches here, all the same man. There's one for us and 2 for them.
The great problem is fear. We are afraid of one another. And from that point of view, it's necessary to meet and to talk and to listen to one another.
For those who never go at all.
We don't need to always call discussions such as this, forums such as this, as conflict resolution. Within the name, we've decided that there is conflict that we need to resolve. Number one, we're not going to resolve anything. But number 2, we're not at conflict. We have more in common than we often realize.
12 different versions of our time.
I'm always a bit concerned about when people talk about religious wars or religious conflicts, because sometimes I think that they may be they're motivated by a wide range of things, and sometimes I think that religion is co-opted.
These are always courageous issues, and the people who create a safe space for these issues to be aired, they are courageous people. And more often than not, in their own communities and their own traditions, they tend to be pushing against barriers and boundaries, which often can be quite firm and often quite reactive as well. So I came to support the group here in doing that work.
Ah, let the circle be wide round the fireside, and we'll soon make room for you. Let your heart have no fear, for there's no strangers here, just friends that you never knew. Shake the hand of the man from the far distant land. Meet him and treat him well. And the young girl so fair, with the brownish, darkish coloured hair, she's got a story to tell.
So what happens in these encounters is that we talk with one another, talk to one another, rather than talking about one another. Because it's very easy to talk about one another, because it's kind of safe exercise, because you can express your own prejudices and your own convictions, and some of which may be true. But when you're talking with another person or to another person, then you engage in a discussion where you're also trying to understand more about this person. What's this person's experiences? Where are they coming from?
Let your heart have no fear, for there's no strangers here, just friends that you never knew. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. You notice I spoke the last line of the song. The old people used to say, whenever you sing a song, you bring yourself and you bring people into another world. So in order to bring everybody back down gently to the earth, you just speak the last line.
Islam spread in the world by trade, by peaceful talk, by interfaith, by offering them the resources. In Islam, the offering of resources is the prime duty of you, that you make sure that your neighbors have enough food and you're not having a feast in your house. And this is the responsibility of Islam. Islam teaches the fundamental looking after another human being.
One of the great passions of my life is traditional Irish music. I've been, I started playing classical violin from the age of 6, and in the course of it, just listening to the great masters, Tommy Sands really sort of stood out as somebody who managed to combine both artistic craftsmanship with a real heart for building peace in this part of the world.
Carry on, carry on. You can hear the people singing. Carry on, carry on, till peace will come again.
Over the years, Tommy has managed through the gift of his music to, if you like, act as one of the ancient bards of Ireland, who is able to bring people from quite extreme opposing sides into opposition with one another. So he's managed to bring kind of loyalist paramilitaries and Republican paramilitaries into relationship with one another, political leaders, both unionist and nationalist, and religious leaders from across the divide into relationship with one another, using the tools of art and music.
Initially, Tommy Sands, I think, was very influential in seeing it move forward, and Muhammad al-Hussaini, who is a Muslim sheikh who has a kind of a deep intuitive connection to Christians and Jews, and it doesn't just see himself as a Muslim in his box, very much sees himself trying to build bridges with those who are different.
The concept of music of healing, it comes from a song written by Tommy Sands and Pete Seeger, and it gave its context and content to a seminar where politicians and religious leaders were invited to discuss often controversial topics in the neighborliness created by arts, music and songs.
And then as myself and Muhammad and Tommy and Katrine Sands were talking, it became clear that it would be great to use this beautiful centre right on the Irish border that has a history of reconciliation and hosting events of reconciliation to be a place where very distinct religious traditions could come together and listen to each other, and we begin to try to understand each other.
We invited the three Abrahamic religions, the Jews, the Christian and the Muslim, and each in turn celebrated a special feast from their religion. A Passover for the Jews, the Feast of Eid for the Muslim, and the Epiphany for the Christian.
When I first came, I didn't know what to expect. It was kind of I had agreed when Tommy phoned. I was in the mosque, he phoned. I spoke to him personally. I knew of him from his music. And I thought, that sounds really great. I like the idea of agreeing to sort of a better way of disagreement. I thought it was a great concept. And then about a week before it hit the papers that Pastor McConnell was coming, one of the committee contacted me and said, look, you can't go. This is going to be a big drama and it's going to be in the media. And we've had a couple of bad incidents with media, and they've really misinterpreted or misrepresented our community and misrepresented our centre, and they thought, right, this is going to be a big fight and we don't want fights and we don't want to get involved with anything controversial. And I phoned Katrine and Tommy and they reassured me, look, it's not going to be, we're not here for a showdown. And I thought, well, I'll go along and we'll see how it goes.
Many of you will know the name Pastor McConnell from the news over the last couple of years. Pastor McConnell was a man who made some remarks from the pulpit about Islam. And there was a most remarkable young Muslim from England who came across to the court case because Pastor McConnell found himself in court facing charges over racist remarks. And this young Muslim man, a scholar himself from England, he came across and he testified on behalf of Pastor McConnell. And it was a really remarkable act of generosity and forgiveness. And you know, gestures, we know gestures from our own peace process, how important gestures are, like handshakes.
I must admit, the first night I felt a bit frustrated because I felt that our community was talked about, and that's the way it was, the whole Pastor McConnell incident. Partly because the community, the committee in the mosque didn't want to get in fights, and they thought just keep quiet, it'll go away. But what that meant is that other people were giving the narrative for us, and I felt very silenced.
Pastor McConnell, you're very welcome. Thank you very much for coming. Tell us a little bit about how did your early growing up prepare you for what was to come?
The little bedroom that I was in, there was a hole in the mantel, and when the mantel was on, there was a blue light came through, and I remember that. And at that Christmas, I was given a prize by my Sunday school teacher on William Carey, the missionary that went to India. And I remember kneeling down beside my bed and saying, Lord, will you make me like this man, this missionary? And God visited me and touched my life and changed my life.
At that time, you know, people were talking about the blasphemous sermon, and it's like it's nothing to do with what he said about Islam as a faith. It was the fact that Muslims weren't to be trusted. And I think that for people like me who have non-Muslim family, everything I do by certain members of my family is, oh, it's because she's Muslim. They're taught to lie. It affects my life personally, if you know what I mean. It affects how friends and family see me, because they assume, because I've converted, that I have these, I'm doing this because I'm Muslim. You know, if I'm cheeky, it's because I'm grumpy. It's nothing to do with my faith. Actually, it's contrary to my faith. You know, if I'm having a bad day and I snap at someone, it's not because I think you're an infidel, it's because I'm having a bad day. But people I know are interpreting, you know, so it was affecting me personally, that kind of attitude to Islam.
Are there elements within Christianity that would also be deserving of the same criticism, if you understand?
Yes, I think so. There are extremists. There's extremists in every religion. And even in Christianity, there are extremists. I'm sorry to say they proclaim their loyalty to the Lord Jesus Christ, and they're not loyal to him at all. There's no love in their heart. There's no grace in their heart. There's no mercy in their heart. And my stance regarding Islam was, I preached that sermon. It went around the world. It went around the world. Never thought a sermon would go around the world like it. And but it was because of a young Muslim girl who was converted to Christianity. And she married a young American doctor. And her parents delivered her over to the authorities. And she was pregnant. And they said that she was guilty of adultery, as well as idolatry, guilty of adultery. And they threatened her with 100 lashes, and if she didn't recant, that they would finally execute her. Now that stirred my heart.
I mean, we saw there, we had an Eid celebration on Friday. Tommy and Catherine actually came down, it was lovely. And you know, then on Facebook, someone sent me a link. There's a picture of us outside, it was a B&Q. And you know, the comments underneath, you know, burn them, get them out, bomb them. You know, I'm in tears. I was there with my 2-month-old and my 4-year-old and my 5-year-old children. And people want to kill us just for existing, you know. So for me, it was, you know, obviously we have to counter out the extremists in our, you know, faith. Well, thankfully I don't know any, but, you know, we speak against their narratives and we say, look, these people do not represent us, but we can't tolerate extremists on the other side that say all Muslims have to be deported or whatever else.
When Pastor McConnell was taken to court that time for what he said about Muslims, on what grounds did you support him?
Well, I think it's really important. I work as an academic in Islamic studies, and it's absolutely critical in the work that I do, which relates to abuses of religion. That's all religion, not just Islamist extremism.
I think the second day I got a chance to speak to Pastor McConnell about what our faith really is about and why it was hurtful. And I don't know if he registered or if he understood, but just to be able to say that on behalf of my community, I felt was a great opportunity, and it was in a non-kind of aggressive way.
So I'm from his part of the road, if you like, down around the Shore Road there. And back in the early 90s, I wasn't that long ordained really, maybe a couple of years ordained. And I happened to see a notice in the Belfast Telegraph from the pastor here. And I noticed the title of the sermon was, "Does the Roman Catholic Church Worship Mary?" And I went out of interest to listen to him, to hear what he had to say. And afterwards I introduced myself to him and we had a discussion. We agreed to disagree, basically. I think we would diverge theologically. I'm very much a Catholic and you're very much in the evangelical Protestant tradition. And but I developed a great affection for this man here.
That's right.
And then when all this business started about a year and a half ago or 2 years ago, and because I thought back to our dispute, our theological argument, and I says to myself, you know, like, we can have a dispute, we can have a debate, and you know, why take someone to court? And I thought it was political correctness gone mad, and I also thought it was a terrible waste of resources and of public resources, because at that time, a couple of years ago, and we're probably in the same position today, they were saying that there wasn't enough money to cut the grass verges on the roads and things like that. And yet they were taking Pastor McConnell to this whole court case, which I thought was a load of nonsense, and I decided to speak up for him.
You know, as clergy, we're all called to speak the truth. You know, we're all called to speak the truth. And I've always said that in a society there needs to be a mixed economy between saints and peacemakers like yourself that build harmony and bridges. But there also need to be whistleblowers and prophets that tell uncomfortable truths that people really don't want to hear. And those prophets get buried outside the city wall. They're persecuted and they're hated for doing so. And in terms of political correctness, we're now in a situation, for example, the University of Glasgow Theology Department. This is a theology department that you've heard of trigger warnings and safe spaces in American universities. Now the students in the theology department at Glasgow University are allowed to exempt themselves from classes and lectures pertaining to Jesus' crucifixion because they might find it too traumatic to discuss this. Now this is really kind of extreme.
When we had these events, we've run a series of events here now, and when you meet members of the Muslim community in Ireland, we don't have a huge Muslim population, but we have a small population of wonderful people. They haven't made Ireland worse. They've actually brought something beautiful to it, you know.
In terms of my personal journey, I guess you're inevitably heavily sculpted and shaped by the realities of being born a second generation person from a Muslim background, from immigrant parents, in growing up in Britain, and facing all the challenges that brings.
Muslims and Christians have fought for hundreds of years in back streets and battlefields, but there is for people to get together like this and there's a sense of unity in a different way. And we're actually.
And I also forgot to tell you that I have Muslim ladies in my choir. And Muslim members of my church, and I never said to them, "Are you a Muslim?" They came and heard the gospel, raised their hand that they wanted Christ, and that was it.
I come from a very old family. We have 800 years of history. That's something that that was drummed into me from my earliest years. You know, a very strong sense of who we are, what our identity is about, our history, our heritage, our poetry, our coat of arms, all that kind of stuff. And so that was very clearly forged into the way that my parents brought me up.
And I thank God for Paddy here, who stood by me, and for Muhammad. They've become wonderful friends to me, lovely friends, and I respect them and I love them and I pray for them every day that God will bless them, and particularly the journey that Muhammad is on. And he's on a journey, and I say to my fellow believers in Christ, pray for him because God's dealing with him, and pray for Paddy.
At the same time, my parents were also quite clear that, you know, that they wanted me to have an English education, so all the way from prep school through to school and then university, medical school, and so on. It's just been very much an establishment English education.
When I was 19, I spent a year in South Africa, kind of doing a kind of gap year with Youth with a Mission, this Christian mission agency I work with. One of the defining moments during that year was when I was in Mumbai in India, which is a city of about 20 million people. And I was there to tell people about Jesus and be this great evangelist, you know. And I remember one day getting into a taxi with a Muslim taxi driver, and I'm sitting there thinking I'm going to get to tell this person about my faith. And we started talking, and he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from this very small country you've probably never heard of. It's called Northern Ireland." And he literally immediately turned and said, "Oh, Northern Ireland, I've heard of that. That's where the Christians are killing each other."
Never really wanted to go to medical school anyway. And so I spent a lot of time gate crashing theology lectures and literature lectures, because my love was very much in the arts and music and so on. And then in the east of Oxford, there was, away from the dreaming spires and all the stuffiness of the university, there was an Irish pub, and so I used to go down there and play fiddle.
Sometimes the truth's like a hair in the cornfield. You know that it's there, but you can't put your arms around it. All we can hope is to follow its footprints, sing the music of healing. And who would have thought I could feel so contented, know that I was wrong. After all of my rambles, I will learn to be hard, and I've learned how to tremble, singing the music of healing.
You know, this guy, he specifically worked with Muslims, and he sort of told us about a very 2D version of Islam. You know, they don't believe in Jesus, and we need to bring them the truth, and blah blah blah. And I thought, well, it's great work. This is what I need to do. And I felt like I need to learn Arabic. And Queen's actually had an Arabic course, so I started going to. That's where I met some other Muslim converts.
Tell us a little bit about your own work.
Well, my work is as an Islamic theologian and the Imam of the Islamic Centre in Ireland, as well as the chair of the Irish Muslim Peace and Integration Council. Not just being there for my community, but most importantly, reaching out to other communities, because there is so much prejudice, there is so many misunderstandings, misconceptions regarding not just my community, but every other community, every other. So to reach out to the other is mainly what I do.
I also went on a course in England, and there was this, I didn't drink alcohol, and this other lady, she didn't drink alcohol either, and she talked about how God was going to help her with her work and stuff, and I just assumed she was Christian, because to me, only Christians talk like that, and turned out she was Turkish Muslim.
I think it was Rabbi Natan who did the Ramadan, I believe, which was an interesting thing for a rabbi to do.
That's beautiful.
It happened to be at the beginning of Ramadan, and I thought, what about just allowing some bridge building to be done if my community and those in even my own family see a rabbi fasting? If only for a good talking point. That's what it attempted to do. To get the ball moving, to get the needle just a stretch in the direction towards the good, away from a sense of how different we are towards, we can share, we can explore, we can even interact with on a very profound spiritual level without losing who we are.
Can I use this opportunity to invite Rabbi to our mosque in Dublin this year, inshallah, in Ramadan? We do a community iftar every year in which we invite people from all different traditions to come to join us in the iftar meal.
And for me, it was very simple. There's a God who created the world. They're not too fundamentalist and high. And our job as human beings is to worship him and to serve our fellow human beings. And that's the basis beyond all the other things. And that's the basis of my faith. And I felt it reflected my heart more. And it made more sense to me that God would be, if there is a God, and obviously I believed in him, that he would make his faith open to as many people who would come. And, you know, if people didn't hear the truth, they would still have a way to him.
The forum that we met in Rostrevor was a wonderful place. The serene environment of the sea, the mountains, and the house, and the environment they created for meeting people. That they're comfortable speaking about their faith, sharing faith, and talking, and perhaps offering the solution. Because we all have solutions for things.
So you know, out of all of this came a deep understanding from talking to friends and you know, clergy colleagues from the different traditions of just how interrelated we are, how we share a common DNA. And we're extremely mixed up.
We are drawing into conflict all the time. We're hearing about, we're electing people who, you know, talking hostile languages on media and fake news and tweeting and all. What is this nonsense, you know?
The artificial severance between different faith communities that is imposed upon us is actually an untruth. The reality is that we are intimately connected to one another, both in terms of, you know, physical genealogy, but also in terms of our intellectual genealogy.
Food is a very basic need, and we look into this, the kind of corruption going on in the world about owning the grains and things like that, and you know, then you come to a conclusion that where are we heading? Do we have to learn from each other or not? And these are the fundamental questions that we must work on and form alliances, make forums, make time.
That Jesus mentioned, you know, about these hypocrites, and you know, it's mentioned in the Quran repeatedly about the hypocrites, the people who do things to appear to be good or to appear to follow religion, but their heart is empty. And you know, Prophet Muhammad, he talked about the days whenever, and we see that now, you know, in the fundamentalist sort of. I don't like using that word fundamentalist because for me they're not following the fundamentals, the extremist interpretations of Islam. So they'll repeat the Quran, but it'll not go past their throats. There's no love in their hearts, and there's no love for their fellow man.
Northern Ireland, from my limited experience, is in the process of a lot of dialogue. There are mixed cultures here, and the mixed cultures are growing exponentially. So the idea of having dialogue between various groups is very important.
It had to be the first time we're sitting there at a table with Christians, Muslims, Jews, and people of no faith as well, sort of breaking matzah, this kind of very flat bread. So it's always a bit of trying not to lose anything in translation when you're taking the depth of a 3,000 plus year Jewish ritual and making it accessible and interesting. I learned much more than I taught on that night.
The years that I spent in Israel, I wasn't involved at all in dialogue between religions. It just wasn't something that cropped up in my daily life. But having moved here, it plays a very important part. How that relates to other religions, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Islam, whether it's Buddhism, whatever. To be able to understand people, I think, is really important.
I had invited a friend of mine, a Muslim woman, to come for a Friday night. To come, see the synagogue, experience what it is, to pray with us. She was in as I'm an Orthodox rabbi in an Orthodox synagogue. She was in the women's section, and the men's section is divided. So I was hearing but not seeing what was happening from her side. Basically, as it was reported to me afterwards, she was sitting with the other women, wearing a hijab, looking completely like a Muslim, surrounded by Jewish women. One of the younger 14, 15-year-old girls saw a hijab wearing Muslim walk into the synagogue and entirely stressed, freaked out, closed her book, screamed, ran out of the synagogue, ran back to her mom, who was back at home around the street, and the mom said, "Run quickly, tell security there's what's happening," because what's a Muslim doing in a synagogue? And security came out. Then I got involved and said it was okay, and it seemed to show how deeply divided we are, though we've been living literally as neighbors.
Understanding each other is important. Not to be persuasive about my ways, and not to allow myself to be persuaded by other ways, but to have the dialogue to understand who is my neighbor in the narrow sense and in the wide sense.
I tend to think media a little bit like the political process, and isn't to be blamed for what's happening. I think it's just a reflection of what's happening, that people want to live within their filter bubble. So my Facebook page is a perfect example. All the algorithms I have on my Facebook page during every sort of Israel-Palestine conflict will always point me in the direction of how great Israel is and how the Palestinians are in the wrong. Now, my Palestinian friends, my Muslim friends, have exactly a whole different perspective because they're seeing a different press experience and a different media feed is coming to them. And then we talk to each other afterwards, and we haven't seen the same information. We haven't talked to the same people. We haven't been in the same Facebook pages, nor had the same Twitter or WhatsApp groups connected to us. And we're in, as we walk down the same street or sit in the same office, we're in separate universes entirely.
A huge thank you to Tommy. Tommy actually said you have about 2 to 3 minutes, which for a rabbi is an excruciating short amount of time to be able to talk. There's a story actually of a rabbi who gives a long 20-minute sermon, as rabbis do. Don't worry, Tommy, it gets better.
The concept of walking with God means doing in this world what He created you to do. Adam was given 2 jobs, Lovda ul Shomra, to look after the Garden of Eden, right, and to work it. So to walk with God means to do that, to look after the world that He has put us in, and that means people who are created in the image of God, to get on with them. That's doing God's work, and not to abuse the planet. So that could mean even ecologically. We're here to look after God's creation. That's part of walking with God.
For myself and my family, the main part was the number of invites we got into Muslims' homes saying, "Come, break the fast with us. Come, join, be part of our family, be part of our community." And just open doors across that world was a fascinating, wonderful, and life-changing experience.
My mother, when she buys or is given a piece of electrical equipment, comes with a booklet, and she actually calls it the Bible, and she says, if you want to know how to use the piece of equipment that you've got, right, first read the Bible. So that's actually, it's very good. If you want to know how to get on, right, you have a code of practice. It actually becomes easy when you've got a source. You can refer to source. If you don't understand, you have people that can explain it.
One of my first academic positions was as a research fellow at a Jewish rabbinical college in North London, which I have to say was is the proudest and the highest academic honour of my entire career, actually, after being the first sort of non-Jewish member of staff on the books and everything. And I had the honour, the abounding honour of being able to teach classical Islamic studies, particularly scriptural studies and interpretation and exegesis of Islamic texts and tradition, to rabbis and rabbinical students. And what I found was just this enormous enthusiasm and thirst for learning that I've never encountered anywhere else, and a real sharpness and eagerness to understand and to know. And it was just a privilege to come in to teach every single time. It would just, what we ironically ended up with at the end of these programs was a bunch of rabbis and rabbinical students that were far more, academically literate in terms of Islamic sacred text than, most imams that I've met, actually.
You also have parameters for life, and the parameters are quite definitive within the Bible. So for us, it's talking about the Old Testament. Right? For the Christian religion, it's the Old Testament plus the New Testament. But you have parameters, so you know where you are. Morality is not something that I need to define. It's there. And therefore it gives me a code of practice. It helps me to stay on. I nearly said that the straight and narrow, but it's actually not narrow. It's very broad. A lot of people feel that religion is restricting, it's confining, but it's actually quite liberating, because to know what to do, when to do, how to do, if to do, and maybe not to do, it's all there. So what's important about these meetings are two things. First of all, the opportunity to listen to others, not necessarily concentrating on expressing your own idea, but to be able to listen to others. And it's a grand opportunity to we shouldn't miss that opportunity of listening to others, because then we can learn to respect other people as we would want to be respected. So that's an important lesson. So gatherings like this, that's the first thing. And the second thing is the actual content of the exchange, to be able to discuss concepts, either from source or be it an early source or be it a later source. It's something that each religious belief has. It has its sources. So to be able to have that exchange as well, I think it's wonderful.
I said, who owns that music that's so full of joy and pain? But the pipers and the harpers and the lambeck drummers play. She said, who owns the teardrops falling in the rain? Down by the lagoon side, when we dance, and when we dance, we'll dance together. When we cry, we'll hold each other. When we love, we'll love forever. Down by the lagoon side.
I understand exactly what they're trying to do, and it's exactly what you would expect Tommy Sands and those people involved in it to do. And that is to understand, to have a respect for your own view, and if you have a respect for your own view, you will automatically, eventually, have a respect for the views of others. So relationships begin with respect. Sectarianism is a kind of disease that affects all of us. So I not only fight against a problem which is out there someplace, I fight against a problem which is inside of myself. So I have to struggle to know what it is to be a Christian and to try to work it out. But then when you cross these divisions and these barriers, you then become enriched and blessed by the experience which you have. And if you never cross the barriers, never cross the frontiers, and remain enclosed inside your own community, then there's a whole lot of stuff that you don't actually get to know or to appreciate or to understand. I think now we realize that because we fought so much among ourselves as churches and faiths, not just religions, but faiths, fought so much. So many people have now discovered, well, a plague in all your houses, we can live without you. And so now we have to say, whatever we were doing wasn't very good. And so maybe we might now begin to understand a faith in a loving, forgiving God and an openness to accept that others have the same right to go to that God as God chooses, not as I choose. What's this person's experiences? Where are they coming from? And that applies in all of life. It applies when men are talking with women and not just about women, or straight people talking with gay, lesbian people and not about gay, lesbian people. So it's very important to talk with people and not just talk about people. So this exercise here enables us as a group of people who are Christians, Muslims and Jews, and some people who are maybe not believers at all, to be engaged in this conversation with one another and to listen to presentations from different traditions and then have a chance in small groups to try to unpack some of that stuff.
Well, I was drawn to Rostrevor through knowing Johnny Clark and having spoken to YWAM about my understanding of how we should read the scriptures in the light of the Middle East conflict and how Christians, Jews and Muslims should work together for justice, peace and reconciliation in the Middle East. And I was very excited to be part of the little small group that met and began to draft a declaration and work through how we can agree to disagree without it leading to violence or conflict.
It must be, our tradition is to sit during prayer. And the old man thinks back and says, no, that is not a tradition. And this young rabbi is ripping his hair out, thinking, but they're standing, they're sitting, they're screaming, they're arguing. The old man says, that is our tradition.
So this Rostrevor Declaration, which is a very comprehensive kind of statement, but not too long. It's important that it's not too long. It can be put out there as a significant contribution to the way in which Christians and Muslims and Jews ought to relate to one another and to respect one another while recognizing the differences which exist between one another, and to defend one another and to the right to be different and the right to change your religion if you wish to. So if you want to change from being a Muslim to a Christian, you've got the right to do it. If you want to change from being a Christian to a Muslim, you have the right to do it. You've got the right to change, which is enshrined actually in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that you have the right on the Declaration on Religious Freedom.
Having, in a sense, tried and tested the process of high disagreement through a series of meetings, and having honed a declaration, in one sense, it's just the beginning of the journey. My aspiration would be that we address the issues that are most likely to lead to conflict, to an unraveling of the peace process, to sectarianism, to ghettoization of whoever we're dealing with. So, for example, the growing numbers of refugees and ethnic minorities coming into Ireland are an opportunity or a threat. They're an opportunity for demonstrating integration and cohesion and empathy for the poor, the marginalized, the refugee. They're equally a threat in that they create greater tension. It's already there between the faith communities. So I would be encouraged if we address that issue. How do we do higher disagreement in the context of how do we as British and Irish welcome the stranger, welcome the refugee? Because in many contexts, our history demonstrates that at times past we were the refugees, we were the outsiders.
There's no point having a good idea or a good declaration which stays set on a piece of paper. So the question for the group behind this particular series of meetings is how are they going to take that out into the media, and can they get social media or whatever it is, how are you going to get this message out there in order that people understand it, and it becomes a document which becomes the basis for discussion.
And it is this text that we are going to take to different spheres of our society, starting with primary school children who will adapt and adopt this declaration, and then to a group of politicians.
it's vitally important, in the light of Brexit, that we work hard to diffuse the tensions that are inevitably there between Europe and Britain, and the way those differences will have to be worked out if we go the route of Brexit or if we don't. Will there be a border? What kind of border? Hard border, soft border? How can we build on the Good Friday Agreement that has seen so many benefits and blessings to Irish and British people in Ireland? So for me, it's a case of finding the tension points, the issues that are most likely to lead to conflict, and applying the principles of the Rostrevor Declaration to those issues and inviting others to join in the conversation.
One of the things that we are wanting to pursue as we take the initiatives that we've been running here further, what we're kind of initially calling diversity dinners, where instead of just having church leaders and religious leaders come to an event like this, we actually allow people and encourage people to host meals at their homes. And in those meals, they will invite people of difference.
For me, the story of the Samaritan, we call it the Good Samaritan, speaks into this journey that we've been on with the Rostrevor Declaration, in that Jesus teaches us that we should treat the people that we meet as our neighbours, for whom we have a responsibility, but in the sense stripped of their culture, their religion, and see them as human beings created in the image of God with dignity and value. In one sense, we should treat them as if we were encountering Jesus. How would we treat Jesus if we met him? That's how we should treat one another.
If we can collaborate on a bigger issues of the world and be conscious of the righteousness of the task, then we strive hard enough to draw the conclusion that this can be solved.
If Christianity is marked by fear, then it's no longer the Christianity of Jesus. It's become some other kind of weird religious kind of group that you're just trying to protect your own identity, So I think we need a change in how we see others. We see the other.
And do you not remember, we once walked side by side, so the bells of Belfast city might sing harmony and pride. The past, it has been taken, but the future's yours and mine. Down by the wagon side, on your own this time. And when
you have to be very respectable for everyone, and everyone has something to teach you. Just as a little insect there is a reflection of God, or the grass, or the tree, or the beautiful flower, or the sunset, or the mountains, or the moon, or whatever. It's all reflecting part of the great mystery.
I've always said that at community level on the ground, that a tremendous amount of good work is done in terms of reconciliation and developing community spirit. And I've seen so much of it myself, cross-border, cross-community, and I often think that people are ahead of the politicians when it comes to reconciliation and working towards it.
There is a strong perspective that actually Christians have been part of the problem over here. And so more people are turned off. They don't want to go to church anymore. They're sick of religion. They're sick of the dogma and the sense of exclusion of certain people. So I think there's a real need for religious leaders like myself or anyone to start going, that's not what Christianity is about. Christianity is about welcoming the outsiders. It's about opening the doors. It's about building bridges, not about building walls.
I think when a time of change comes upon us, fear is a natural reaction. And there are still vested interests who have a capacity to leverage fear for political or other gain. The religious people, at times like this, they have to come together. And if they cannot transcend fear, then the rest of the communities, they have very little hope to fall back on. So I think it's really, really key that in this time of turmoil, in this time when people seem to be leaping into vested camps for safety, that there are people who are actually bringing everyone out of their vested camps and bringing them out into the open space and saying, look, we have to keep engaging.
We often see, our battle is against secularism. And because of that, we want to stay together and say, isn't religion wonderful? We have the antidote to the evils of capitalistic secular society. And sometimes we become so, maybe so involved with our own story and our own narrative that we sometimes forget to ask the question, how are we doing? How come people are leaving religion? What are they turning away from? What's leaving them cold when they should be warmed by what we bring?
I believe that because of the unique nature of the way that people relate in such an intimate way to one another in Ireland, it has the opportunity to write a different story to what we're seeing in other parts of Europe and North America and other Western countries in relation specifically to the issues around Muslim migration, integration, extremism and populist right-wing backlash.
If it's a true religion, then the injunction upon you is to make peace wherever you go, to try and be a good person. I think in the Bible it talks about battering, spears into plowshares, things like that, And I think that's an injunction on people of all faith to promote goodwill and reconciliation amongst men.
Before you can, do anything evil to someone, you have to kind of demonize them. Say this person is, that person is bad or whatever it is. But in fact, that person is the same as you or me, And once you break that barrier, then that's when the dialogue begins. And then you can move on. This doesn't happen overnight.
No, solution is not that you look after just your narrow interest and mind your own family and mind your own community and mind your own little world. No, the responsibility is bigger. That would make, I think, the world a better place to live for all of us.
There's work to be done. And sometimes I think I haven't asked even the right questions to get the right answers to figure out what the work is. But being here in this group, especially, as I said, with people on the side, that's where some of the deepest questions, really penetrating, pin-pricking questions are coming out.
Most people are exhausted by trying to use the old ways and to stick to the old truths, so much so that they're now willing to have a look beyond conventional solutions and look for more imaginative, creative solutions.
In the past, we didn't talk to Catholics. Are we going to be like that with Muslims? Are we going to not talk to them? Are we going to keep them apart? I hope not. I hope in the days to come, the months and years, Christians in Northern Ireland, both Protestant and Catholic, are leading the way and reaching out to religious minorities.
I think the real dialogue is when you have time for people. You talk to them. If you're neighbours, you meet with them, ask them how they are. And begin to share their life.
I have to say that if there's one way that the divine connects to my life most vividly, it's in the love, the abounding love of Tommy and Catherine and yourself and my other brothers and sisters from different faith communities, and of course my childhood brothers I've grown up with, and the music of the Irish tradition. It's just the happiest thing I have.
And they're here from every land with a plan for the clan and a way to their own way to freedom. And if we can't agree, we can always let it be a higher quality of disagreement, and we'll see. Will you come?